You water your plants every day, and slowly, they're dying in front of you. The leaves lose color. The growth stops. Something feels off, but you can't understand why. Because in your mind, you're doing everything right. You're not ignoring them. You're not forgetting them. If anything, you're giving them more care than they need. But that's exactly the problem. Because what if I told you, your plant is not dying from neglect, it's dying from too much care? Every time you pour water on the surface, you're not helping it grow. You're weakening it from the inside. You're stopping its roots from going deeper. You're taking away its ability to survive on its own. And the most dangerous part is, you don't even realize it's happening. Because it doesn't look like damage. It looks like care. But once you see what's really happening under the soil, once you understand how roots actually grow, everything will change. You won't just water your plants differently. You'll never look at growth the same way again. Because sometimes, the reason something isn't growing is not because you're doing too little. It's because you're doing too much. The care you trust is quietly destroying your plants. There's a mistake almost everyone makes, and it feels like the right thing to do. You look at your plant, you see dry soil, and your first thought is, I need to water it. So you do it again and again, every day, sometimes even more. Because in your mind, more care means more growth. But this is where the illusion begins. Plants don't grow because you give them more. They grow when you give them what they actually need. And too much water is not help. It's harm. Every time you water too often, the soil stays wet for too long. It never gets a chance to breathe. And that's something most people don't understand. Plants don't just need water. They need air too. Their roots need oxygen to stay alive, to stay strong. But when the soil is always wet, that air disappears. The roots become trapped, sitting in heavy, soaked soil. And slowly, they start to weaken. Then, they begin to rot. Not because you ignored the plant, but because you never gave it space to breathe. And the most dangerous part is, you don't see it happening. There's no warning in the beginning, no clear sign, just a slow change. A little less growth, a little less strength, until one day, your plant looks tired, and you don't understand why. Because in your mind, you were doing everything right. But the truth is, sometimes what feels like care is actually quiet damage, happening where you can't see it, right beneath the surface. Roots don't grow in comfort. They grow in the search for survival. There is something powerful happening under the soil, something you never see, but it decides everything about your plant. The roots and the way they grow is not based on comfort. It's based on need. When the top layer of soil starts to dry, the plant feels it, not like we feel thirst, but in its own silent way. And in that moment, it begins to search. It pushes its roots deeper into the soil, slowly, patiently, reaching down, looking for moisture hidden below. And this process, this search, is what makes the plant strong. Because the deeper the roots go, the more stable the plant becomes. The more water it can find on its own, the longer it can survive without you. But when you keep watering from the top every day, you stop this process before it even begins. The plant never feels that need. It never has to search, because everything is always given, easily, instantly. So what happens? The roots stay near the surface, shallow, weak. They spread only where the water already is, instead of going deeper where real strength is built. And now, your plant becomes dependent. It needs you every day. It can't handle even a short period without water. Because it was never trained to survive on its own. And this is the hidden problem most people don't realize. When you make things too easy, you don't create growth. You create weakness. Because growth has always come from reaching, from searching, from going deeper when something is missing. So when you stop watering too often, when you allow the topsoil to dry, you're not hurting your plant. You're activating something inside it. You're forcing it to grow stronger, to go deeper, to become stable, to become independent. And that is the moment your plant stops just surviving and starts truly growing. What looks dry on top can be drowning everything below. This is where most people get it wrong, not because they don't care, but because they trust what they see. You look at the soil, the top layer feels dry, maybe even a little cracked, and instantly your mind tells you, this plant needs water. So you reach for the watering can again. Without realizing, you might be making the biggest mistake. Because the surface is only a small part of the story. Just a few inches below, the soil can still be holding moisture, enough to keep the roots alive, enough to support the plant. But you don't see that. You only see what's on top. And that's where the illusion begins. Because dry on the surface doesn't always mean dry where it matters. The roots live deeper. They don't depend on what you see above. They depend on what exists below. And when you water too soon, before the deeper soil has had time to dry, you slowly start to flood that hidden space. The soil becomes heavy, wet for too long, and something very important disappears. Air. The tiny spaces in the soil, the ones that carry oxygen, start to fill with water. And once that happens, the roots can no longer breathe. They sit in a space that feels full, but is actually suffocating, and slowly, they lose their strength. Not because there wasn't enough water, but because there was too much of it, for too long. And here's the part that makes this so dangerous. It doesn't look like overwatering. It looks like the plant is struggling. It looks like it needs more help. So what do most people do? They water again, trying to fix the problem that water is already causing. And this creates a cycle, a silent loop, where every attempt to help pushes the plant further into stress. Until one day, the damage becomes visible. Leaves start turning yellow. Growth slows down. The plant begins to look weak. And by that time, the real problem has already been there for a while. Hidden, quiet, growing underneath everything. So the next time you see dry soil on top, pause. Don't react immediately. Go deeper. Check below the surface, because what looks dry to your eyes might already be too wet for your plant. And understanding this thing can completely change how your plants grow, because real care is not about reacting to what you see. It's about understanding what you don't see. The damage you can't see is already happening underground. Overwatering doesn't look dangerous. It doesn't come with a warning. There's no sudden moment where everything collapses. That's why most people never notice it until it's too late. Because the real damage doesn't happen where you can see it. It happens underneath, in the roots, and it happens slowly. At first, everything looks normal. The leaves are still there. The plant is still standing. Maybe growth has slowed a little, but nothing feels serious. So you keep doing what you've been doing. You water again, thinking you're helping. But under the soil, a different story is unfolding. The roots are sitting in water for too long. The soil is heavy. There is no air left. And without air, the roots can't function properly. They start to weaken, soften, lose their strength. Then something worse begins. They start to rot. And this is the most dangerous stage, because you still can't see it. From the outside, the plant just looks a little tired. Maybe the leaves lose their color. Maybe they start to droop. And your mind tells you one thing. It needs more water. So you give it more. Into not realizing you are feeding the exact problem that is destroying it. This is how the cycle traps people. The plant looks weak, so you water more. Water makes the roots worse, so the plant looks even weaker. And the more it struggles, the more you try to help. Until one day, the damage becomes too deep. The roots can no longer support the plant. They can no longer absorb what they need. And now, no amount of water can fix it. Because the problem was never on the surface. It was always below, quiet, invisible, growing over time. And this is what makes overwatering so dangerous. It doesn't shock you. It slowly breaks the foundation while everything still looks okay. So the next time your plant looks weak, don't rush to water it. Pause. Think deeper, because sometimes what looks like thirst is actually suffocation. And the more you try to fix it the same way, the worse it becomes. Real care begins the moment you stop reacting and start understanding what's happening underneath. The damage you can't see is already happening underground. This is the part most people never truly understand, because everything looks fine on the surface while the real problem is quietly growing underneath, hidden in a place your eyes can't reach. Overwatering is not loud. It is not sudden. It does not come with a clear warning sign that tells you to stop. It works slowly, silently, almost patiently, and that is exactly why it becomes so dangerous. At the beginning, nothing feels wrong. Your plant still looks alive. The leaves are still there. The color might seem normal. And you feel reassured because you believe you are taking good care of it. You continue watering, following the same routine, trusting that consistency means protection. But beneath the soil, something very different is happening. The roots are sitting in wet soil for too long, and instead of absorbing healthy moisture, they are trapped in a heavy, suffocating environment. The small spaces in the soil that normally carry air begin to disappear, filled with water that stays longer than it should. And this is where the real damage begins, because roots do not only drink water, they also need oxygen to survive, to stay active, to keep the plant alive from within. When that oxygen is gone, the roots start losing their strength. They become soft, fragile, unable to do their job properly. They stop supporting the plant the way they are supposed to, and slowly, without any visible sign at first, they begin to decay. This is not something you can notice immediately, because it happens gradually, layer by layer, deep under the soil where everything looks calm from above. As this damage grows, the plant starts to show small changes. The leaves may look tired, the growth may slow down, the color may fade slightly. But these signs are confusing because they don't clearly point to the real cause. And this is where most people make the biggest mistake. They see weakness, and they respond with more water. They think the plant is thirsty, that it needs more help, more care, more attention. So they water again, believing they are fixing the problem. But in reality, they are making it worse, all because the roots are already struggling, already suffocating, already damaged. Adding more water does not heal them, it pushes them deeper into stress. This creates a silent cycle that is hard to break. The plant looks weak, so you water more. The roots get worse, so the plant looks even weaker. And the more it struggles, the more you try to help in the same way. It feels like you are doing the right thing, but the result keeps getting worse until one day the damage reaches a point where the plant can no longer recover. The roots are too weak, too damaged, too far gone. They can no longer absorb water properly. They can no longer support growth, and now, even if you stop watering, it may already be too late. Not because you didn't care, but because the care was not understood correctly. And this is what makes this lesson so important, because it changes how you see the entire situation. It teaches you that not all problems are visible, not all damage happens where you can see it, and not all solutions come from doing more. Sometimes the real problem is hidden below everything you are looking at. Sometimes what looks like thirst is actually suffocation. And sometimes the more you try to fix something without understanding it, the deeper the damage becomes. So the next time your plant looks weak, don't rush to react. Don't immediately reach for water. Pause for a moment and think about what might be happening underneath, beyond what your eyes can see. Because true care is not about quick action, it is about clear understanding. And once you understand what is happening below the surface, you stop guessing. Once you stop repeating the same mistake, and you start giving your plant what it truly needs to survive and grow. One small shift. That completely changes how your plants grow. Everything changes here, not because you start doing more, but because you finally start doing it the right way. Most people believe better results come from more effort, more watering, more checking, more attention. But the truth is, real growth begins when you change the direction of your care, not the amount, the direction. Right now, most people water lightly, and often, a little bit every day. Just enough to wet the top layer, just enough to feel like they've done something. But this creates a problem, because the water never reaches deep. It stays near the surface. And when water stays near the surface, roots stay there too. Shallow, weak, dependent. The plant never learns to go deeper because it never has a reason to. And this is where the shift happens. Instead of watering a little every day, you water deeply, and then you stop. You give enough water so it reaches the lower layers of the soil, where the roots should be growing, where strength is built. And then you wait. You don't rush back the next day. You don't react to the surface drying. You allow the soil to slowly lose moisture from the top. You allow the plant to feel that space, that small gap between waterings, because that gap is where growth begins. Now something changes inside the plant. It senses that the top is dry, so it starts reaching downward, searching, expanding, going deeper into the soil to find the water that still exists below. And this is the moment your plant starts transforming. The roots grow longer, stronger, more stable. Now they are not just sitting near the surface waiting for you. They are exploring, adapting, building their own system. And over time, this changes everything. The plant becomes more resilient. It can handle longer periods without water. It becomes less sensitive to small changes, less dependent on constant care, and more capable of sustaining itself. All from one simple shift. You didn't add more effort. You didn't buy anything new. You didn't do anything complicated. You just changed how you water, from frequent and shallow to deep and intentional. And that difference is what separates weak plants from strong ones. Because growth was never about how often you give. It was always about how deeply it reaches. So the next time you water your plant, don't think about today. Think about what's happening underneath. Think about where that water is going. And ask yourself, am I feeding the surface or am I building strength below it? Because once you make this shift, everything starts to change, quietly, but powerfully. The less you interfere, the stronger your plants become. This is the part that feels the hardest to accept, because everything inside you tells you to do more, to check more, to water more, to stay involved. It feels responsible. It feels like care. But sometimes, what feels like care is actually control. And control can quietly weaken what you're trying to grow. When you keep stepping in every day, watering at the first sign of dryness, reacting to every small change, you never give the plant a chance to adjust. You never give it space to adapt. And without adaptation, there is no strength. Because strength is not built when everything is perfect. It is built when something has to respond, when something has to adjust, when something has to survive without immediate help. Plants are designed for this. They are not fragile in the way we think. They don't need constant attention. They need the right conditions. And then they need space. Space to grow. Space to reach. Space to figure things out on their own. But when you interfere too often, you interrupt that process. You keep resetting the system. Every time the plant begins to adjust, you step in and change the conditions again. So it never completes that cycle. It never fully adapts. It never becomes stable. It stays dependent, always waiting for you, always needing your next action. And that creates weakness, because anything that depends on constant support cannot survive without it. But when you step back, when you allow the soil to dry naturally, when you give time between watering, something powerful begins to happen. The plant starts learning, not in a conscious way, but in a natural, biological way. Its roots begin to adjust to the environment. They grow deeper to access moisture that lasts longer. They spread wider to create stability. They become stronger because they are being used, because they are being challenged. And over time, this builds resilience. Now the plant is not fragile. Now it doesn't panic when conditions change. Now it can handle delays. It can survive longer gaps. It can continue growing even when everything is not perfect. And that is real strength. Not something that looks good only when everything is controlled, but something that remains stable even when you step away. This is the difference between a plant that survives only under your care and a plant that can thrive on its own. And it all comes down to one thing: how much you interfere. Because too much involvement creates dependency, but the right amount of space creates independence. So the next time you feel the urge to water again, pause. Don't react immediately. Give it time. Trust the process happening below the surface. Because sometimes the best thing you can do for growth is nothing. Not because you don't care, but because you finally understand how growth actually works. And in that moment, you stop trying to control everything and you start allowing strength to develop naturally. Build a system so your plants thrive without you. Most people take care of plants like a daily task, something you have to return to again and again. Check the soil, add water, adjust things, repeat. And for a while, it works, but only as long as you are there. Only as long as you keep showing up. The moment you stop, everything starts to fall apart. The plant weakens. The soil dries too fast. The balance breaks. And this is the hidden problem. You didn't build a system. You built a dependency, a setup that only works when you are constantly involved. But real growth, lasting growth, does not come from constant control. It comes from design, from creating conditions that continue to work, even when you are not there. And this is where everything changes. Instead of asking, "What should I do every day?" you start asking a different question. How can I set this up so it works without me? Because once you ask that, your entire approach shifts. You stop focusing on short-term fixes, and you start building long-term stability. You begin to think about the soil itself. Is it holding water properly? Is it draining excess water? Is it allowing air to move through it? Because the soil is not just dirt. It is the environment your plant lives in. And if that environment is balanced, everything becomes easier. Water doesn't stay trapped too long. It moves where it needs to go. It stays where it's useful, and slowly releases over time. Now the roots don't rely on daily watering. They tap into moisture that lasts longer. They grow into a system that supports them continuously, and this changes everything. Because now, your plant is not reacting to you. It is responding to its environment, and that environment is stable, consistent, reliable. You also begin to space out your watering, not based on habit, but based on need. You water deeply, then allow time for the system to naturally dry from the top, while still holding moisture below. Now there is rhythm. Now there is balance. Now there is a cycle that works on its own. And this is what allows your plant to survive, even when you step away, even when you forget for a few days, even when life gets busy. Because the plant is no longer dependent on your daily action. It is supported by the system you created. And that is the real goal. Not to be needed every day, but to build something that works without constant attention. Because when you rely on effort alone, you create pressure. But when you rely on a system, you create stability. And stability is what allows growth to continue without interruption. So instead of trying to be more consistent, focus on being more intentional. Instead of doing more, build better. Because once your system is right, your plants won't just survive when you're gone. They will continue to grow, quietly, naturally, exactly the way they were meant to. This isn't about plants. It's about how real growth actually works. If you step back for a moment and really look at everything you've just understood, you'll realize something deeper. This was never just about plants. It was about how growth works in everything. Because the same mistake we make with plants, we make in life. We think more control creates better results. We think constant attention creates strength. We think doing more, fixing more, interfering more will lead to better outcomes. But it doesn't. It creates dependency. It creates weakness that looks like care. Because when something is always supported from the outside, it never learns to stand on its own. And that is the quiet truth most people never face. Growth is not built by comfort. It is built in the space where comfort is missing. It is built when something has to reach, has to adapt, has to respond without immediate help. That's exactly what happens when you stop watering too often. You create a gap, a small space where the plant has to figure things out, where it has to grow deeper, where it has to become stronger. And that same principle applies everywhere, in your habits, in your mindset, in the way you handle challenges. If everything is always easy, you don't grow. If every discomfort is removed immediately, you never build strength. Because strength is not created when everything is given to you. It is created when something is missing, and you learn how to reach for it. And this is why stepping back matters, not just for plants, but for everything. Because stepping back is not neglect. It is trust. Trust in the process, and trust in the system. Trust that growth will happen, even when you are not constantly controlling it. And that is a powerful shift from control to understanding, from reacting to allowing, from doing more to doing what actually matters. So the next time you feel the urge to control everything, to fix everything immediately, to stay involved in every small detail, pause and remember this. Growth does not need constant interference. It needs the right conditions, and then it needs space. Space to develop, space to struggle a little, space to become something stronger than it was before. Because in the end, real growth is never loud. It doesn't happen on the surface. It happens quietly, in places you don't see, through processes you don't control. And once you understand that, you stop trying to force growth. And you start allowing it, not just in your plants, but in everything around you. And that is where true strength begins. So now, before you water your plant again, pause just for a moment. Look at it, not with worry, but with understanding. All this time, you thought you were helping it grow. You thought more care, more water, more attention was the answer. But now you see it differently. Growth was never about doing more. It was about doing what's right, at the right time. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is step back, not because you don't care, but because you finally understand. Because real growth doesn't happen when everything is given easily. It happens when something has space to reach, to adapt, to become stronger on its own. And your plant has been waiting for that chance, waiting for you to stop controlling every moment and start trusting the process happening beneath the surface. So from this moment on, you won't just water your plants. You'll guide their growth. You'll create the right conditions, and then allow nature to do what it was always meant to do. And maybe this lesson stays with you beyond plants. Maybe the next time something feels slow or uncomfortable or uncertain, you don't rush to fix it. You pause. You trust. You give it space to grow. Because sometimes what looks like nothing is happening is actually where everything is changing. Quietly, deeply, powerfully. And that is where real growth begins.